In the golden chambers of the Palace of Alexandria, a 16-year-old girl, Arsinoe, lay motionless on the purple silk sheets. Her body did not tremble from the cold that came from the Mediterranean, but from something deeper, something more ancient. Arsinoe had left her childhood behind that night, but not by her own will. Her father, Ptolemy Pineru, the conqueror who had inherited Egypt from the ashes of Alexander's empire, had just carried out what he called dynastic preparation. The tears had dried hours ago. Only the dense silence remained, that of someone who understands that their body no longer belongs to them, that it never would. They say the body doesn't lie, and Arsinoe's body was telling a story no royal scribe would dare to document. Within the marble walls that guarded the secrets of the most powerful Hellenistic dynasty, a cruel truth was brewing. The purity of royal blood came at the price of the innocence of women. She was no longer the princess playing in the palace gardens. She was no longer the favored daughter of the pharaoh. She was no longer free. She was simply a royal womb destined to perpetuate a lineage. A body shaped by hands that were meant to protect her, but had instead marked her forever. To understand how she got there, we must go back to a time when gods walked among mortals and kings believed they were direct descendants of Alexander the Great. In 316 BC, when the world still smelled of the blood of Macedonian conquests, and the echoes of Hellenistic trumpets rang from Egypt to India, a girl was born who would bear the weight of 2 crowns and the horror of a cursed lineage. Arsinoe Philadelphus, born into the house of the Ptolemies, the dynasty that would rule Egypt for the next 300 years. Her father, Ptolemy Ptolemaeus Sota, had been one of Alexander the Great's closest generals and, after the conqueror's death, took control of the ancient world's greatest treasure. Egypt was not just a kingdom, it was the library of humanity, the granary of the Mediterranean, the land where pharaohs became gods. From a young age, Arsinoe showed an intelligence that unsettled the palace advisors. She spoke Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic fluently. She understood the complex trade networks that connected Alexandria to the known world, and had a morbid fascination with the mummification rituals performed in the temples. Her mother, Berenice Prime, saw not a daughter, but a perfectly crafted political tool. Arsinoe's childhood was spent between lessons of royal etiquette, studies of dynastic genealogy, and the constant whispers about the importance of keeping the Ptolemaic blood pure. Her tutors explained that marriages between siblings were not just a tradition, but a divine necessity. Pharaohs, they said, descended from gods, and mixing that sacred blood with that of common mortals was a blasphemy that could topple the kingdom. But what no tutor explained was the price her body would pay for that purity. At 14, when her body began to change, Arsinoe noticed a shift in her father's gaze. It was no longer the usual tenderness of a protective father, but something deeper, more inquisitive. Ptolemy Prime began to spend more time alone with her under the pretense of preparing her for the role she would someday take as queen. Servants avoided crossing her path when she headed toward the princesses. Chambers. Guards were given strict orders not to interrupt, and her mother, Berenice Prime, seemed increasingly absent, retreating behind closed doors and long silences. Over time, Arsinoe understood that many things happened at court without being named, that not all traditions were noble, and that the divine lineage, so loudly proclaimed, required silent sacrifices. She learned to retreat her soul, to build an invisible armor that kept her seemingly intact, even though inside she was breaking into fragments. During the day, she smiled with the grace expected of a well-educated princess. But at night, when she was alone in her room, she felt that her body no longer belonged to her entirely. It was a space shared between duty, obedience, and the loss of oneself. In her mind, she drew invisible boundaries, small refuges where her essence was still free. Outside, the world continued to turn. The wars between the Diadochi were ongoing. Temples exalted the greatness of the Ptolemaic throne, and banquets proceeded with grandeur. No one seemed to notice that the young heir was slowly fading behind the golden walls of the palace. At the age of 16, Arsinoe received a news that would change the course of her life. Her father had arranged her marriage to Lysimachus, the elderly king of Thrace, a veteran of Alexander's campaigns who needed a young wife to solidify his dynasty. She received the news with a strange calm, as if nothing could surprise her anymore. She understood that this union was not a reward, but a way to quietly remove her. The rumors of her increasing withdrawal and absences were beginning to disturb the court. Sending her away was both a political and personal solution. And so, her wedding was celebrated in Alexandria under official powers. It was a cold ceremony where Arsinoe remained motionless like a marble statue. She wore a white peplos embroidered with gold threads, but for her, it was a shroud. There were no tears, no smiles, just the grimace of someone who had learned that life was a performance, and her role would always be that of a beautiful victim. When the ship carrying her to Thrace pulled away from the Egyptian shores, Arsinoe looked for the last time at the columns of the Alexandrian lighthouse. She was 16, and she had already endured more horror than many battle-hardened soldiers. Her body bore the marks of a father who had preferred to possess her rather than protect her, and her soul carried the weight of a silence that had become her only companion. The journey to Thrace lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Arsinoe, rocked by the waves of the Mediterranean, began to mentally chart the map of her new life. She was no longer the frightened child who wandered the halls of the Alexandrian palace. Pain had become her harshest teacher, but also her most effective one. She had learned to read intentions in gazes, to detect danger in silences, and to turn her apparent fragility into a weapon of political seduction. Lysimachus welcomed her at the port of Lysimachaea with the proper pomp of a Ptolemaic princess. He was a massive man, with a grey beard and scars on his face like maps of battles won. At 60, he still retained the fierceness of the warrior who had fought alongside Alexander in India, but his eyes revealed the weariness of someone who had seen too many mortal gods die. What Arsinoe had not expected was to find in him not the rapist she feared, but the protector she had never had. Lysimachus treated her with a rough gentleness, like someone handling a precious but dangerous sword. On the first night, when she lay in the bridal bed, expecting the repetition of horror, he simply sat beside her and spoke of Alexander. That night, Lysimachus did not touch her, nor the next night, nor the one after. For weeks, the old king merely talked to her, teaching her the intricacies of Thracian politics, and introducing her to a world where women could have a voice without being punished for it. Slowly, Arsinoe began to breathe without fear, but the peace would not last long. In Thrace, as in all Hellenistic courts, power was a hungry beast that devoured those who let their guard down. Agathocles, Lysimachus's son from a previous marriage, saw in Arsinoe a threat to his succession. A young Egyptian queen meant the possibility of new heirs that could displace his claim to the throne. Arsinoe sensed his hostility from their first encounter. Agathocles had the look of a predator. She knew all too well, but this time, what she saw in his eyes was not desire, but calculated hatred. She understood that she had jumped from one cage to another, and if she wanted to survive in Thrace, she would need allies. That was when her real political education began. Arsinoe became an obsessive student of survival. She learned to weave networks of loyalty among the Thracian generals, to win the favor of the women at court, and to manipulate the strings of power from the shadows. Every smile was calculated, every gesture measured, every word heavy as gold. For 5 years, Arsinoe ruled in Thrace like a true queen. Lysimachus, aging but still formidable, increasingly relied on her political intelligence. She negotiated trade treaties, organized the kingdom's finances, and even led the defense of Lysimachaea when the Thracian tribes revolted. The trauma of her youth had not disappeared, but she had learned to use it as fuel for her fierce ambition. However, fate had prepared another cruel lesson for her. In 281 BC, when Arsinoe was 35 years old, Lysimachus was killed in the Battle of Corypedion, facing Seleucus I. With him also died the stability she had so carefully built. Agathocles, now king of Thrace, wasted no time. His first order was the immediate exile of Arsinoe. He would not execute her, that would provoke Egypt's wrath, but he would not allow her to remain as a threat to his throne. She was given 3 days to leave the kingdom she had helped rule for a decade. Arsinoe left Thrace, taking only the jewels she could hide and a minimal escort. At 35 years old, she found herself once again homeless, without protection, and armed only with her intelligence and a determination forged in pain. But this time, she was not a defenseless teenager. She was a woman who had learned that power must be taken, not given. The journey back to Egypt was a pilgrimage to a past she preferred to forget. When the Ptolemaic ships appeared on the horizon and the columns of the Alexandrian lighthouse rose against the sky, Arsinoe felt a knot in her stomach. She was returning to the place where she had lost her innocence, where her own father had turned her into conquered territory. But the Egypt that was receiving her was no longer the same as the one she had left 20 years earlier. Ptolemy I had died, and in his place sat his brother Ptolemy II, a 40-year-old man who had inherited not only the kingdom, but also his father's dynastic obsessions. The reunion between the brothers was a diplomatic dance, concealing deep chasms of pain and calculation. But Ptolemy II, who knew the rumors about his father's abuses, welcomed Arsinoe with a mix of guilt and fascination. She, in turn, studied her brother's every move. Like someone who had learned to read the intentions behind each gesture, she immediately understood that Ptolemy was facing serious issues. The kingdom was threatened by internal revolts, the royal finances were unstable, and other Hellenistic kingdoms were conspiring to fragment Ptolemaic power. He needed an ally, someone with political experience and no personal ambitions that could threaten his throne. Arsinoe saw the opportunity and seized it with the precision of a hunter. For months, she became her brother's unofficial advisor, the voice that whispered strategies in private councils, the mind that designed policies to strengthen the kingdom. Slowly, meticulously, she became indispensable. Then came the proposal that would change the course of Ptolemaic history. In 276 BC, during a winter night, as the desert winds shook the palms of Alexandria, Ptolemy II summoned his sister to his private chambers. The air was tense, as if the words about to be spoken could change the fate of the world. Ptolemy mentioned the demands of the priests and the gods, urging a royal marriage that would strengthen the dynasty, a marriage that would unite their forces and legitimize their reign in the eyes of Egypt. Arsinoe understood before he finished speaking. The proposal was clear. A marriage between brothers, a Ptolemaic tradition, and the state policy was being presented as a government policy. The silence was heavy, like the stillness before a sandstorm. Arsinoe felt time stand still, and she realized that all the decisions of her life had led her to this moment. She could refuse, demand respect, call out what was being offered as unacceptable, but she knew that doing so would mean giving up the power she had worked so hard to obtain. In that moment, something broke and something was rebuilt. The girl who had suffered at the hands of her father was now gone, and in her place, a woman was born, ready to use the same weapons that had destroyed her, to wear a crown that no one could take away from her. The marriage of Arsinoe and Ptolemy was held with such grandeur that it overshadowed all the previous marriages of the Ptolemaic family. The priests of Egypt declared the union a gift from the gods. The Greek rulers praised it as a symbol of royal purity, and the people accepted it as another of their rulers' strange customs. But for Arsinoe, stepping into the temple of Ptah, it was not a marriage, but a coronation. She was not marrying her brother, she was marrying absolute power. Her childhood trauma had not disappeared, but she had learned to turn that trauma into a power that would make her invincible. In the years that followed, Arsinoe Sekou became the most powerful queen in Egyptian history. She was not just the wife of the pharaoh, she was his co-ruler, his chief strategist, the mind behind the policies that would make Egypt the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean. She reorganized the royal treasury, established new trade routes, and negotiated treaties that strengthened the kingdom's borders. Her image appeared on coins alongside Ptolemy II, an unparalleled honor that symbolized her near-divine status. Foreign ambassadors knew that in order to negotiate with Egypt, they had to negotiate with her. But the price of that power was the same system that had destroyed her. When the royal advisors proposed incestuous marriages for the future generations of the Ptolemaic family, Arsinoe not only welcomed it, but became its strongest supporter. She was the one who set the rules that would establish incestuous relationships as the foundation of Ptolemaic family ties for the next 2 centuries. She was the one who created the philosophies that would turn sexual abuse within the family into a royal sacrament. In moments of lucidity, Arsinoe was aware of the cruel irony of her fate. She had become the architect of the system that had victimized her. In 270 BCE, Arsinoe II passed away in Alexandria at the age of 46. Ptolemy immediately ordered her deification. Arsinoe was given the title of the goddess Philadelphus, the lover of her brothers. It was a title that, knowing her life, seemed more like a curse than an honor. Her policies survived much longer than her body. The system she had designed, based on incestuous marriages, became the defining characteristic of the Ptolemaic dynasty. For the next 200 years, brother and sister would marry in the same manner, gradually deteriorating, culminating in Cleopatra Selene. This is the story of Arsinoe II Philadelphus, but it is also the story of something more universal, the human ability to perpetuate the damage we have suffered. Arsinoe was not just a powerful queen. She was the living proof that power can corrupt even those who have suffered the worst abuses. Even today, when the news tells us about powerful families where abuse is passed down as an inheritance, the ghost of Arsinoe whispers from the dust of Alexandria. Power does not heal the wounds of the soul. It only turns them into weapons. The story of Arsinoe is a painful reality in which both her father and brother exploited her body and dignity for political gain. Her father, Ptolemy, a powerful pharaoh, took advantage of his daughter in order to solidify his reign. He used Arsinoe as a tool for his personal benefit, turning her innocence into a political weapon to strengthen his power. Arsinoe's body became nothing more than a political instrument, and the exploitation of her body not only destroyed her personal dignity but also transformed her into a victimized figure who could never make decisions for herself or have control over her own fate. Another facet of this cruelty came from her brother. Arsinoe's brother also exploited her, intending to take ownership of her body. He used her again for his own political interests, maintaining sexual relations with her. Her brother, who was the heir to the Ptolemaic dynasty, continually tried to control her life according to his will, stripping her of her physical freedom and turning her into a political tool. Arsinoe was not only victimized by her father and brother, but she was also forced to silently endure this cruelty because she had no other choice. This all led to a tragedy in Arsinoe's life, where she felt herself to be a part of her family's political ambitions. Her body had become a mere instrument, used by her father and brother to fortify their rule. For Arsinoe, this became a painful truth, and she survived only because her body and her fate were both in the hands of her family.